Logan Pierce knelt on the floor, clutching Bolt, his companion of 12 years, in one final embrace.
Okay, you can go now.
Tears streamed down the weathered veteran's face as he whispered his last promise of goodbye. And then, with a phenomenal effort that seemed to come from beyond, the aging German Shepherd slowly lifted his front paws, draping them over Logan's neck in a deliberate embrace. Logan sobbed, believing this was their final farewell. The veterinarian, Dr. Amber Blake, stood by with the syringe ready in her hand, prepared to end Bolt's suffering. She placed her thumb on the plunger, but just as she was about to press, Bolt suddenly let out a high, agonizing whine, and his body went rigid in a violent seizure. Dr. Blake froze, stunned. She dropped the syringe to the floor and shouted the single word that changed everything. "Stop!" She had just realized a terrifying truth. The embrace wasn't a farewell, and the blood test was lying. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The wind was the only thing that moved with any purpose in this part of Montana. It swept down from the Gallatin Range, carrying the sharp promise of the first deep snow, and hissed through the rigid pines surrounding the small cabin. Here, stillness was a currency, and Logan Pierce was a wealthy man. Logan stood on his modest porch, the old brown leather of his jacket pulled tight. He was a man carved from the same hard landscape he inhabited, tall and with a lean strength that spoke of utility rather than vanity. His brown hair, long enough to brush the collar of his jacket, was streaked with silver at the temples. His face was a roadmap of hard sun and harder times, weather-beaten and creased, though the lines around his eyes softened when he was truly alone. A thick, untrimmed beard and mustache, more gray than brown, obscured his mouth, but not the grim set of his jaw. He finished stacking the last of the split pine against the cabin wall, his movements economical and precise. Every action was measured, a habit forged in the deserts of Afghanistan 2 decades prior, and now perfected in isolation. His life was a fortress built of routine. Wake at 5 a.m., coffee, check the perimeter, chop wood, maintain equipment, eat, read, sleep. The only variable in this rigid equation was currently watching him from the doorway. Bolt. The dog was a magnificent German Shepherd, or at least he had been. Now he was magnificent in his age. His thick coat, once a rich black and tan, had faded to a noble silver gray and white. His muzzle was completely frosted, and his dark, intelligent eyes held the patient wisdom of an animal who had seen his master through the very worst of the world. He moved stiffly, his back hips betraying the arthritis that plagued him, but he never failed to be where Logan was. Bolt was Logan's anchor. When the nightmares came, suffocating him in the dust and the ringing sound of chaos, it was the steady, warm presence of Bolt pressed against his back that brought him back to the cold Montana air. Logan brushed sawdust from his faded denim jeans. "Patrol's done, old man," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. Bolt's tail managed a single, slow thump against the doorframe. "Cold's setting in. Let's see if that truck heater is going to fight me again." He walked past the dog, giving Bolt a slow, familiar scratch behind the ears, and headed toward the detached garage. The garage was Logan's sanctuary and his purgatory. It housed his only connection to the outside world, a dark blue 1994 pickup truck that was, like its owner, showing its age. The heavy door groaned upward, revealing the cold space within. The air was sharp with the scent of gasoline, old oil, and dust. Logan clicked on the overhead fluorescent light, which flickered twice before casting a sterile glow over the truck. Bolt followed him in, his claws making a faint clicking sound on the smooth concrete floor. The dog settled onto a worn, circular rug near the workbench, letting out a low sigh as his stiff joints settled. He watched his master with unwavering focus. "All right," Logan said, more to himself than to the dog. He popped the hood. "Let's see the damage." For the next hour, Logan worked. He was methodical, tracing lines, checking connections, his hands, though scarred and calloused, moving with practiced skill. He traced the heater core hoses, his breath pluming in the cold air. He found the problem: a clamp on a lower hose, corroded and loose. He grabbed a wrench from the wall. As he leaned deep into the engine bay, twisting his arm at an awkward angle to reach the clamp, a thin stream of bright, almost neon green liquid escaped the hose. It dripped silently onto the chassis, then found a path downward. A steady, quiet dripping began, landing on the concrete floor directly under the engine block. The small puddle began to spread, a vibrant, unnatural color against the dull gray. Logan muttered under his breath, his frustration mounting as the wrench slipped. A sharp metallic sound echoed as the tool struck the engine block. He did not see the puddle forming. He did not see Bolt, roused by the sudden noise, lift his white-muzzled head. The dog's curiosity was piqued. He rose stiffly and padded over to the front of the truck. He sniffed at the air, then lowered his head to the puddle. The smell was faint, but intriguing. Sweet. He extended his tongue and lapped at the liquid. He licked again, cleaning a small patch of the concrete, before the cold, sweet taste satisfied him. He turned, padded back to his rug, circled twice, and lay back down. A few minutes later, Logan finally managed to tighten the clamp, cutting off the leak. He wiped his hands on an oily rag, oblivious. "That'll have to do," he grunted. He lowered the hood, the sound of its closing seeming overloud in the small space. "Come on, Bolt. Time for chow." He switched off the light, and the garage was plunged back into darkness. The small remaining patch of green antifreeze on the floor was invisible. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the wood stove was a welcome embrace. Logan moved to the kitchen, the familiar routine of the evening taking over. He pulled a can of beef stew from the pantry for himself and opened the large bag of dog food. The sound of dry kibble rattling into the metal bowl usually brought Bolt right to his feet, a low, eager whine rumbling in his chest. Tonight, there was no sound. Logan placed the bowl on the floor in its usual spot. "Bolt, food." The shepherd remained on his mat by the fire. He lifted his head, looked at the bowl, and then looked back at Logan. He seemed tired. Not just the usual end-of-day weariness, but something deeper. Logan frowned. "Hey, you hearing me? Get your dinner." Bolt pushed himself up with a grunt, his back legs trembling slightly. He walked over to the bowl, sniffed the food, and then, without taking a single bite, turned around. He walked slowly back to the mat and lay down, resting his head on his paws with a sigh that seemed to drain the energy from him. A cold prickle of unease touched Logan's neck. Bolt had never skipped a meal, not once. Logan walked over and knelt beside the dog, his knees popping in the quiet. He ran his hand over the dog's back. Bolt's fur felt coarse. "What's the matter, buddy?" he asked, his voice losing its harsh edge. "Stomach off?" Bolt just looked at him, his dark eyes cloudy. He didn't lift his head. Logan watched him for a long, silent minute. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the insistent howl of the wind outside. Logan's mind raced, searching for an explanation, but he pushed the darker thoughts away. It was just the cold. The sudden drop in temperature was probably hard on his old bones. That was all. "Just the cold," Logan said aloud, reinforcing the thought. "And you're not a puppy anymore, are you? Just getting old." He convinced himself it was nothing. A simple case of old age. He got up, prepared his own stew, and sat down at his small table. But the food tasted like ash. He couldn't shake the image of the untouched bowl and the deep, unsettling lethargy that had claimed his only friend. Logan was jolted from a shallow, uneasy sleep by a sound that did not belong. It was a wretched, wet, heaving sound that cut through the quiet of the cabin. His eyes snapped open. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to embers, and the room was filled with a deep, pre-dawn chill. The wind still moaned outside, a lonely counterpoint to the new, terrible sound coming from the darkness near the door. He threw off the thick wool blanket, his feet hitting the cold floorboards. "Bolt?" Another gagging, choking noise answered him. Logan's hand fumbled for the oil lamp on his nightstand, his fingers clumsy. He struck a match, the small flare of sulfur illuminating his own wide, frightened eyes before the wick caught. He lifted the lamp high. Bolt was not on his mat. He had tried to get to the door. He had failed. The dog was lying on his side, his legs splayed uselessly on the wooden floor. A pool of yellowish, stringy bile was spreading out from his muzzle. Bolt's entire body was trembling violently, his back legs twitching with a weakness that terrified Logan. Oh, no, 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 no. The stoic fortress Logan had built around himself dissolved in a rush of cold panic. This was not old age. This was not the cold. This was fast. This was wrong. He rushed to the dog's side, setting the lamp on the table with a clatter. "Bolt! Hey, I'm here. I'm here, old man." Bolt's cloudy eyes rolled toward him, unfocused and dull with misery. He let out a low, pained whine, a sound that seemed to be pulled from the deepest part of him. He tried to lift his head, but it only flopped back to the floor. Okay, we're going to get you cleaned up." Logan's voice was tight, strained. He grabbed an old towel from the kitchen, his movements hurried and uncharacteristically frantic. He gently cleaned the dog's face, his hand shaking. When he tried to help the dog stand, Bolt's legs buckled. There was no strength in them. He was a dead weight. With a grunt, Logan slid his arms under the dog's chest and hips. Bolt felt terrifyingly limp. He carried his friend, all 90 pounds of him, back to the mat by the cold fireplace and covered him with the blanket. He knelt there for a long time, watching the shallow, ragged rise and fall of Bolt's chest. The dog's breathing was fast and shallow. Logan filled a bowl with fresh water, dipping his fingers in it and wetting the dog's gums and nose. Bolt's tongue lolled out, but he made no effort to drink. The hours from then until dawn were the longest of Logan's life. He did not sleep. He sat guard, watching the small twitches that ran through Bolt's muscles, listening to the labored breathing. The rationalizations from the night before, "It's just the cold, he's just old," now seemed like a cruel joke. The dog was fading. He was fading, and Logan was completely, utterly helpless. When the first weak gray light of morning finally filtered through the windows, Logan knew he couldn't wait another second. His isolation meant nothing. His hatred of the outside world meant nothing. Only Bolt mattered. His hands, which had field-stripped a rifle in the dark, fumbled as he searched for the small magnetized business card he kept on the refrigerator. Gallatin Valley Veterinary Clinic. His fingers were numb as he dialed the number, his heart hammering against his ribs. A click, a ring, and then a voice, calm and measured, answered on the emergency line. "Gallatin Valley Clinic, this is Lucy." Logan had to clear his throat twice. My dog," he choked out. "He's sick. He's really sick." "Okay, sir, just calm down. I can help you. What's his name?" The voice was professional, slightly weary, the sound of someone who had been awake all night, handling other people's emergencies. "Bolt. His name is Bolt." "And what's happening with Bolt?" Logan's words came out in a rush, a desperate inventory of symptoms. He vomited. Bile. He can't stand up. His legs they won't work. He's shaking, and his breathing is shallow. He won't drink. He skipped dinner last night. I thought he was just cold." "I understand," Lucy's voice, said patiently. "What breed is he, sir?" "German Shepherd. He's old. I don't know exactly. 10, maybe 11. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a few seconds of silence, as the woman, Lucy Webb, processed the information. When she spoke again, her tone was softer, tinged with a practiced sympathy that made Logan's stomach clench. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name." "Pierce, Logan Pierce." "Mr. Pierce, based on what you're describing, the rapid decline, the vomiting, the acute weakness in his back legs, especially in an older, large-breed dog, it sounds like it could be end-stage kidney failure." Logan squeezed his eyes shut. The words hit him like a physical blow. Lucy continued, her voice gentle. "Now, I can't diagnose anything over the phone, of course, but when it happens this quickly, it's often the kidneys failing. It's a natural process, Mr. Pierce. The body it gets tired and starts to shut down." A natural process. The words echoed in the cold cabin. They validated every fear he'd had. He hadn't been wrong last night. He'd just been in denial. This was old age. This was the end. "Can you bring him in this morning?" Lucy asked. "We open at 8. We can run some blood work, see what's happening, and discuss comfort measures." Comfort measures. A hollow clinical term for what came next. Logan looked down at Bolt. The dog was shivering, his eyes half closed in a haze of pain. The dignity he once possessed was gone, replaced by a frail, suffering creature. The thought of tests, of poking and prodding him, of dragging him into a bright, sterile room only to be told what he already knew. It felt like cruelty. It felt like prolonging the suffering for his own selfish need not to be alone. A soldier knows when a battle is lost. The panic in Logan's chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, dreadful certainty. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hollow. "What's the point of tests?" he whispered. "If it's his time, I don't want him to suffer, not one more minute. I'm prolonging his suffering." There was another longer pause. The sympathy in Lucy Webb's voice was no longer professional. It was personal. I understand," she said softly. If you've made that decision, we can help him. We can make sure he's comfortable, and that it's peaceful." Logan took a shuddering breath. "I'll be there when you open, at 8. We'll be there." "We'll be ready for you, Mr. Pierce. We'll have a room prepared." The call ended with a quiet click. Logan let the phone drop from his hand. He slid down to the floor and pulled the old, tattered mat closer, so Bolt's head was resting near his leg. He had made the heaviest decision of his life. He was going to take his best friend on one last ride, to a place where the pain would stop. He sat there in the cold, gray dawn, one hand resting on Bolt's shivering side, and for the first time since he'd left the service, he let himself weep. The cabin was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the ragged, shallow breathing of the dog on the mat. 7:30 a.m. It was time. Logan moved with a slow, heavy dread. He pulled his oldest, softest blanket from the foot of his bed, a faded, olive-drab wool blanket, standard issue from his time in the service. He spread it on the floor beside Bolt. "Okay, old man," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Time to go." He slid his arms under the dog, one arm beneath the chest, the other under the hips. Bolt was a dead weight, his body limp and unresisting. There was no tension in his muscles, no attempt to help. He only let out a low, almost imperceptible whine as Logan lifted him. He was 90 pounds of surrender. Logan carefully placed him in the center of the blanket, then wrapped the thick wool around his frail body, tucking it in until only Bolt's gray-white head was visible. He carried his friend out the cabin door into the biting morning air. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, and the wind had a sharp edge that promised more snow. He walked to the old pickup truck, the one he had been working on in the garage just 2 days before. The thought hit him like a physical blow, bending him double for a second. The garage, the truck. He squeezed his eyes shut, banishing the image of the green puddle. He couldn't think about that. Not now. He opened the passenger door. Instead of the floor, Logan carefully set the blanket-wrapped bundle directly onto the passenger seat, positioning Bolt so he was braced against the seat back. He leaned in, his face close to the dog's. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered. "I'll be right here." Bolt's eyes were open, but they were dull, gazing at nothing. Logan closed the door gently, walked around the hood, and climbed into the driver's seat. He sat for a full minute, his hands gripping the cold steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was a man heading to his own execution. He put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low, rumbling groan, protesting the cold before settling into its familiar, rough idle. He put the truck in gear, and they rolled down the long, unpaved driveway. The drive was silent. The only sounds were the constant drone of the engine and the high, thin whistle of the wind as it slipped past the window seals. Logan kept his eyes fixed on the empty, snow-dusted road, but his mind was not there. He was consumed, eaten alive by a guilt so profound it felt like a physical sickness. He glanced at the passenger seat, at the still gray head resting on the green wool. He was betraying the one living thing that had ever shown him unconditional loyalty. A soldier's deepest creed was, "No man left behind." And here he was, driving his most faithful soldier to an appointed death. His mind slipped, pulling him back 20 years to a concrete building that smelled of bleach and fear. It was 2005. He had been out of the Marine Corps for 6 months, living in a void, haunted by the ringing in his ears and the ghosts he'd brought back from Fallujah. He was a hollowed-out man, and someone had told him to get a dog. The county shelter was loud. The noise was overwhelming, a chaotic chorus of barks, yelps, and whines that rattled his nerves. He walked past cages of dogs jumping, spinning, desperate for attention. And then he saw him. In a cage at the far end, a German shepherd, about a year old, sat perfectly still. He wasn't barking. He wasn't jumping. He was just sitting, his head tilted, watching Logan with an intensity that was almost human. His card said his name was Bolt, found wandering. Time was running out. Logan had stopped. He knelt by the chain link. The dog didn't move, just continued his silent observation. In that moment, Logan recognized something in the dog's eyes. A stillness, a wariness, a sense that the world was a loud, unpredictable place. "You don't like the noise either, do you?" Logan had whispered. He'd adopted him that day. He hadn't rescued Bolt. Bolt had, in every way that mattered, rescued him. The truck hit a patch of ice, the tires spinning for a second before catching. The small jolt brought Logan back to the present. He looked at Bolt. The dog hadn't moved. They passed the trailhead for the Bridger foothills, the entrance now half buried in a drift. How many times had they been up that trail? Bolt, younger then, bounding ahead, disappearing into the pines only to reappear, tongue lolling, waiting for his slow human companion. The memory was so sharp, so painful, that Logan's chest tightened. He was betraying those memories. He was betraying that younger dog, too. His guilt spiraled, pulling him deeper, back to the darkest nights in the cabin, back to the nightmares. He was back in the Humvee. The air was thick with dust and the smell of cordite. The world dissolved into a blinding flash and a sudden, deafening report that ripped the air apart. Shouting. He could hear shouting. He was trying to reach for someone. "Mark! Mark!" He was trying to pull him back. Mark Holloway, the kid from Ohio, barely 20, who always had a smile, who was saving his pay to buy his mom a car. Logan could feel the sticky, wet warmth on his hands. He couldn't get a grip. The ringing in his ears was so loud, it was screaming. Logan would wake up with a gasp, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest, his hands clenched, his body slick with sweat. He would be half out of bed, ready to fight, the cabin walls closing in on him. And then a solid, warm pressure. Bolt would not be barking or panicking. He would simply stand beside the bed, pressing his heavy head onto Logan's chest, a silent, living anchor. When the shaking was bad, Bolt would push closer, sometimes nudging his hand, sometimes just licking the sweat from his face. He would not leave. He would stand his ground, a silent sentry, until Logan's breathing slowed, until the cabin in Montana swam back into focus and the dust of Afghanistan receded. "You're on watch," Logan would whisper, his hand buried in the dog's thick ruff. "Good watch, buddy." Now his watch was ending. The first few buildings of Bozeman appeared on the horizon. The town was waking up. Cars were moving. People were starting their day, blissfully unaware of the private, agonizing funeral procession happening in the cab of his old truck. Tears blurred Logan's vision. He reached out a trembling hand and laid it on Bolt's head. The fur was cool. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the first word spoken on the trip. The silence was broken, and his composure broke with it. "I'm so sorry, Bolt. I failed you. I'm sorry." He felt like a traitor. He was driving his own rescuer, his own sentry, his only friend, to his death. He turned the truck onto the quieter side street, his movements numb and automatic. He saw the sign, the clean, professional sign he had memorized from the business card. Gallatin Valley Veterinary Clinic. He pulled into the parking lot. It was 7:55 a.m. He put the truck in park, but he couldn't turn off the engine. The low rumble was the only other heartbeat in the cab. He just sat there, his hand resting on his best friend's head, unable to make the final move. Logan sat in the truck for another 2 minutes. The sound of the engine's idle was a low, vibrating comfort, a living thing in the cab with him. Turning it off would make the silence and the decision complete. He closed his eyes, took one final shuddering breath, and turned the key. The cab was plunged into a heavy, dead silence. There was nothing left but the task. He got out, his legs stiff and heavy. He walked to the passenger side and opened the door. Bolt had not moved. His gray muzzle rested on the green wool, his eyes open and vacant, staring at the dashboard. "One last time, buddy." Logan gathered the heavy bundle, the wool blanket protecting the dog from the cold, and cradled him against his chest. He held him the way he might have held a child, his left arm supporting the dog's back, his right arm looped under his hips. He walked toward the glass doors of the Gallatin Valley Veterinary Clinic. The doors sensed his approach and slid open with a soft mechanical rush of air, welcoming him into a world he wanted no part of. The waiting room was bright, clean, and smelled sharply of disinfectant and something vaguely like pet shampoo. Soft instrumental music played from a speaker in the ceiling. A woman with a cat carrier sat in one of the far chairs, scrolling on her phone, oblivious. At the high front desk, a woman with warm brown eyes and neatly pinned dark hair looked up. This was Scarlett Barnes, the receptionist. She had a professional, welcoming smile that faltered and softened the instant she saw Logan. She didn't see a client. She saw a man's heart breaking. She saw the large, blanket-wrapped burden he carried, the gray muzzle peeking out, the 1,000-yard stare in the man's own eyes. She stood up immediately. "Mr. Pierce?" she asked, her voice low and kind. "Lucy said you were coming." Logan could only nod, his throat too tight to form words. "We have a room ready for you," Scarlett said, coming from behind the desk. She didn't gesture for him to sit in the waiting area. She understood. "Please, come this way. Let's get you somewhere quiet." She led him past the other client down a short, brightly lit hallway. At the very end, she opened a door to a room that was different from the rest of the clinic. "You can wait in here," she said gently. "The doctor will be with you in just a moment." Logan stepped inside. She closed the door, leaving him alone in the quiet. The room was painted a soft, calming shade of pale green. The fluorescent lights of the hallway were replaced by a warmer, dimmer lamp in the corner. There was no cold metal examination table. Instead, a small cushioned sofa sat against one wall, with a low wooden table in front of it. On the table was a single, discreet box of tissues. It was a room designed for goodbyes. The kindness of the room felt like a small, sharp cruelty. It was a soft, carpeted, polite place to perform an execution. Awkward and out of place, Logan stood in the center of the room. He was a man of cold floors and hard ground. The sofa felt wrong. He carefully knelt and laid the blanket-wrapped body of his friend on the soft carpet. He unwrapped the wool from Bolt's head, stroking the dog's fur. "Not long now, old man," he whispered. "It'll be over soon." A few minutes later, a soft knock came at the door before it opened. 2 women entered. The first was Dr. Amber Blake. She was in her late 30s, wearing practical blue scrubs, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a tight professional ponytail. Her face was intelligent and focused, and her blue eyes, while compassionate, held the unmistakable sharpness of a medical professional. She was the authority. The woman behind her was younger, with a round, kind face and gentle eyes that were already full of sorrow. This was Leah Turner, the veterinary nurse or technician. She held a clipboard, but kept her hands clasped in front of her, hanging back respectfully. "Mr. Pierce?" Dr. Blake said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Dr. Amber Blake. This is Leah, my technician." Logan nodded, unable to rise. Dr. Blake did not offer condolences or sit on the sofa. She immediately knelt on the carpet right beside Logan, her professionalism a sudden sterile force in the grieving room. "You spoke with Lucy on the phone?" she stated, more than asked. Her hands were already moving, gently but efficiently, over Bolt. She lifted his lip to check his gums. They were pale, almost white, and tacky to the touch. She pressed a finger into them, and the color did not return. She pulled a stethoscope from her neck and listened to his chest. Logan watched, numb. He heard the faint, rapid sound of Bolt's heart beating through the stethoscope. Dr. Blake listened for a long time, her brow furrowed. Finally, she sat back on her heels and looked at Logan. "He's in a very bad way, Mr. Pierce. His heart rate is high and thready, and his gums show severe dehydration and poor circulation. He's cold to the touch. You were right to come in." I just want to let him go," Logan repeated, his voice barely a rasp. "I spoke to Lucy. I don't want him to suffer. I'm not here for tests. I'm here to stop the pain." Dr. Blake looked at the dog, then back at Logan. Her gaze was unflinching, but not unkind. "I understand that, completely," she said. "And we are here to help you with that final kindness. But—" She paused, choosing her words with clinical precision. "Per protocol, and frankly, so we have no regrets later, I must run a quick blood panel." A flicker of frustration, sharp and hot, cut through Logan's fog of grief. "Why?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "What's the point? Can't you see him? He's dying. Just let him be at peace. Don't poke him. Don't hurt him anymore." Dr. Blake held his gaze. She did not back down. "Mr. Pierce, I do see him, and his condition looks severe, but looks like isn't a diagnosis. It is my professional and moral responsibility to know why he is in this state. Lucy suspected kidney failure, and the symptoms match. But it could be something else, a dozen other things." She leaned forward just slightly. "I know this is hard. I know you're exhausted. It will only take 10 minutes. Leah can get a sample in seconds. I will not perform this procedure, Mr. Pierce, until I am 100% certain it is the only option. I owe him that. You both deserve that certainty." Logan stared at her. He wanted to argue. He wanted to yell. He wanted to grab his dog and run back to the cabin where the world made sense. But her logic was a steel trap. Certainty. He had been certain this morning, but her words planted a seed of doubt that was, in its own way, an agonizing, fresh kind of pain. What if he was wrong? He finally deflated, the last of his fight gone. He looked down at Bolt's gray face. "Fine," he whispered. 10 minutes, but be gentle." Dr. Blake's professional mask softened instantly into one of deep compassion. "Thank you," she said softly. She looked at Leah Turner. The nurse stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She knelt beside Logan. "Hi, Bolt," she whispered, stroking his head once. She looked at Logan, her eyes communicating pure empathy. "We'll be so gentle with him. We'll just take him to our treatment area in the back. It's warmer there, and we can get the sample quickly. We'll bring him right back to you before you even miss him, I promise." Logan just nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Blake and Leah slid their hands under the heavy wool blanket. Together, they lifted Bolt as a single unit, a fragile, precious burden. "We will be right back," Dr. Blake said. They carried Bolt out of the room. The door clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the small space. Logan was left alone. He was in a soft, quiet, pale green room, and they had taken his dog. He stared at the empty space on the carpet where Bolt had been. The silence was absolute, and he had never felt so cold in his life. The silence in the soft green room was absolute. It was a weighted, manufactured quiet that pressed in on Logan from all sides, far heavier than the natural empty silence of his cabin. He was alone. They had taken his dog. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the empty patch of carpet where Bolt had been. The cushioned sofa looked absurd. He couldn't sit. Sitting was an act of acceptance, of settling in for a procedure. So he stood, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides, his body vibrating with a tension that had nowhere to go. He looked at the box of tissues on the low table. A neat, floral-patterned box, placed there by someone who understood this room's purpose. He felt a surge of irrational anger at its simple, polite utility. He would not touch it. 10 minutes. Dr. Blake had said 10 minutes. He began to pace, 3 steps one way, pivot 3 steps back. The room felt like a cage. What was worse, the agonizing certainty he'd felt in the truck, or the sliver of false hope Dr. Blake had just inserted? That word, certainty. She had taken his dreadful, solid decision and replaced it with a question mark. What if? The thought was a new kind of torture. What if this wasn't the end? What if it was something simple, something fixable? A bad infection? Something he ate? What if he was about to put his friend down, only to find out moments later that he could have been saved? He stopped pacing. He was praying. He realized with a jolt that he was praying for 2 opposite, conflicting outcomes. He was praying for the tests to come back clean, for a miracle, for this all to be a mistake. And in the same dark, guilty part of his heart, he was praying for the tests to be terrible. He was praying for the numbers to be so high that the decision was no longer his. He was praying for the kidney failure diagnosis, for the cold, hard proof that he was doing the right thing, that this was mercy and not murder. He couldn't bear the thought that this might be his fault. The conflict tore at him. He scrubbed his hands over his face, his beard rough against his palms. He just wanted the pain to stop. For Bolt. For himself. The door opened. Logan's head snapped up, his heart leaping into his throat. It was Leah Turner, the nurse. She was carrying Bolt, still wrapped in the olive drab blanket. Her face was a mask of professional gentleness, impossible to read. She walked in and knelt, placing Bolt back on the exact same spot on the carpet. "He did just fine," she whispered, stroking Bolt's head once. "He was a very good boy." Dr. Blake was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. She wasn't looking at Logan, she was looking at the small internal clock in the hallway. "The sample is running now," Dr. Blake said. Her voice was neutral, clinical. "It's spinning in the centrifuge. I will be right back with the results in about, 6 or 7 minutes." She finally met Logan's desperate gaze. Her expression was unreadable, but her next words felt heavy, final. "Take this time with him." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the room like a hammer blow. Take this time with him. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an instruction. It was the polite medical way of saying, "Say your goodbye." The sliver of hope that had been tormenting Logan vanished, extinguished by those 5 words. The test was a formality. The doctor knew. She had seen this 1,000 times. The blood would only confirm what her eyes had already told her. The tension drained out of Logan, replaced by a cold, hollow wave of despair. This was it. The countdown had begun. He sank to his knees on the soft carpet, his legs no longer able to support him. He was eye level with his best friend. Bolt's breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed, but he was there. He was still there. "Hey, buddy," Logan whispered, his voice breaking. The tears he had been fighting, the ones he had refused to shed in front of the doctor, now came hot and fast. "Hey, old man." The first sob was a raw, ugly sound, torn from his chest. He pressed his hand against his mouth, trying to stifle it, but it was no use. The dam of his composure, built over 20 years of discipline and trauma, shattered completely. "I'm sorry," he wept, the words thick and choked. "I'm so sorry, Bolt. I'm sorry." He stroked the dog's wide, gray head, his fingers tracing the scar above his eye from a long-ago fight with a raccoon. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for all of it, for staying on watch. All those nights. All those god-awful nights." He saw it, clear as day, his cabin bedroom, dark, him bolting upright from a nightmare of sand and fire, the name of Mark Holloway on his lips. And he saw Bolt instantly on his feet, not barking, not scared, just present. pressing his head against Logan's chest, a solid, living anchor in the storm of his memory, grounding him until his heart stopped racing. "You never left your post," Logan cried, tears dripping from his beard onto the dog's fur. "Not once. You were the best soldier, and I'm failing you. I'm leaving you behind." He leaned forward, overwhelmed, until his forehead was resting on the floor beside Bolt's head. He couldn't look at him anymore. He couldn't bear to see the life fading from his eyes. He just knelt there, a broken man, waiting for the footsteps of the doctor to return and end it all. He had to let him go. He had to give him the permission he himself had never been given. He raised his head, forcing himself to look at his friend. He gently cupped the dog's gray muzzle in his hands and pressed his forehead against Bolt's. Skin to fur, man to beast, friend to friend. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm here. I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere. Your watch is over. I'm relieving you of duty, you understand? You're a good boy, the best boy. You're cleared for rest. You can stand down, Bolt. You can let go." He closed his eyes, his tears soaking into the fur between Bolt's ears. He said the words again, a final promise. "I'll be okay. You can go." He held his position, bracing for the stillness, for the last breath. And then, something moved. It wasn't a shiver. It wasn't a muscle twitch. It was an effort. A low, pained groan rumbled from Bolt's chest. Logan's eyes snapped open, but he didn't pull away. He watched, stunned, as Bolt, with an agonizing, trembling slowness, began to lift his head. "Bolt?" The dog's neck muscles quivered, and then, with a strength that should have been impossible, Bolt lifted one front paw. The paw was clumsy, shaking, but it moved with purpose. He raised it, hooking the claws gently into the shoulder of Logan's leather jacket. Logan stopped breathing. Then the other paw moved, slower, weaker. It scraped against Logan's arm, struggling for purchase, before finally coming to rest on his other shoulder. The paws draped over his neck. They were not strong. They held no grip. It was a faint, trembling shadow of an embrace. But it was intentional. It was the same gesture. The same impossible, comforting gesture Bolt used to pull him from his nightmares. In his final moments, with his body shutting down, his friend had heard his master's pain, and with the very last of his strength, he was trying to comfort him. The realization struck Logan with the force of a physical blow. A sound exploded from his chest, a sound of such profound love and agony that it was barely human. He didn't pull away. He surged forward, wrapping his own arms around his dog's neck, holding him tight. He was no longer a soldier. He was no longer a stoic recluse. He was just a man, clinging to his best friend, his face buried in the dog's fur, his entire body shaking with a grief so deep it had no bottom. He held him, and he waited. Logan was still on his knees, his arms wrapped around his dying friend, when the sound he had been dreading came. It was not a loud noise. It was a soft, respectful click as the latch on the comfort room door was turned, followed by the faint whisper of air as the door swung inward. He flinched, a violent tremor running through his own body. He did not pull away from Bolt. He couldn't. He was frozen, his face buried in the dog's gray fur. Bolt's weak paws still draped over his shoulders in that last, impossible embrace. He heard the footsteps. 2 sets. They stopped just inside the room. He did not want to look. If he didn't look, it wasn't real. He could stay here on the floor, in the soft green room, holding his friend, and time would stop. "Logan?" The voice was quiet, hesitant, and it shattered the illusion. It was Dr. Blake. She had called him Mr. Pierce before. The shift to his first name was a small personal intimacy that felt like a final blow. It was the voice of a person delivering a verdict, not a doctor discussing a case. Slowly, reluctantly, Logan raised his head. His eyes were swollen and raw, his face wet with tears. Dr. Amber Blake stood a few feet away, her hands clasped in front of her. Her face, which had been professionally compassionate before, was now a mask of profound, settled sadness. It was a grim, resigned expression, the look of a doctor who had hoped, against all evidence, for a different answer, and had not found it. In her left hand, she held a single, white sheet of paper. The test results. Logan's 1% of hope, the tiny agonizing spark her test had created, vanished. It was extinguished by the look on her face, by the finality of that single sheet of paper. There was no miracle here. There was only the cold, hard proof he had both prayed for and dreaded. He was not a murderer. He was a mercy giver. And it was time. Leah Turner, the nurse, stood just behind the doctor, her own eyes red. Dr. Blake took a small step forward, kneeling so she was almost at his level. "Logan." "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft. He just nodded, a single sharp jerk of his head. He had no words left. "The results confirm it," she continued, her voice steady, mercifully direct. "His kidney levels, his BUN and creatinine, they're what we use to measure kidney function. In a healthy dog, they should be low. His are too high for the machine to even read." She held out the paper, though she didn't expect him to take it. He saw the red, highlighted numbers at the top, followed by a series of clinical-looking error messages. Off the charts. "This is not a chronic condition, Logan. This is acute, total failure. It's end-stage renal failure. There is no recovery from this. His body is completely toxic. He is suffering." "You were right." She paused, her gaze softening. "It's time." The words were a release. The doubt was gone. The guilt of the decision was gone. All that remained was the deep, black, empty chasm of the loss itself. Logan let out a long, shuddering breath, the last of his fight. He sagged, his shoulders slumping. He looked down at Bolt and gently, lovingly, untangled the dog's paws from his neck, laying them on the blanket. He stroked the dog's head, his touch now full of a terrible, final purpose. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Dr. Blake nodded, a flicker of pained understanding in her eyes. She stood and looked at Leah. The nurse stepped forward, her movements now quiet, efficient, and filled with a dreadful reverence. "I just need to place a small catheter, Logan," Leah said, her voice a near whisper. "It will be very quick. It won't hurt him. It just makes sure that everything is peaceful." "I'll hold him," Logan said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He shifted, pulling Bolt's head and chest into his lap. He cradled him, shielding his face from the procedure. "I've got you, buddy," he murmured into the dog's ear. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving. You won't be scared. I've got you." Leah knelt. She had a small kit. With a tiny electric trimmer, she made a soft buzzing sound as she shaved a small 1-inch square of fur from Bolt's left foreleg. Bolt didn't even flinch. Logan felt the vibration of the clippers against his knee. Leah swabbed the skin with an alcohol pad, the sharp, cold smell cutting through the room. "Just a little pinch, sweet boy," she whispered. Logan saw the small needle flash just for a second. Bolt let out a tiny, weak sigh, and then it was done. A small, clear tube was expertly taped to his leg. Leah Turner stood up, her part in the preparation complete. She backed away, tears streaming silently down her face. Logan held Bolt tight. He buried his nose in the fur on Bolt's neck, inhaling his scent, trying to memorize the feel of his weight, the texture of his coat. Dr. Blake stepped forward. She was holding a small syringe filled with a thick, bright pink liquid. It looked peaceful, but to Logan, it was a weapon. "I'm going to inject this into the catheter, Logan," she explained, her voice low and clinical, a necessary anchor in the emotional storm. "It's an overdose of anesthetic. It is very, very fast. He will not feel any pain. He will just fall into a very deep sleep. And then his heart will stop. It will be just like falling asleep." She knelt beside him one last time. "Are you ready?" Logan couldn't speak. He was looking at the dog in his lap, the friend who had saved his life a dozen times over. He gave a final, sharp nod. He buried his face in Bolt's neck. "I love you, buddy," he sobbed. "I love you so much. I'll see you on the other side. Wait for me. Wait for me, Bolt." He heard Dr. Blake uncap the syringe. He heard her pick up the catheter port. He braced himself for the end. Dr. Blake placed her thumb on the plunger, the needle tip touching the port. She was about to press. Suddenly, a sound tore through the quiet room. It was not a sigh. It was not a moan. It was a terrible, high-pitched, agonizing whine that came from deep within Bolt's chest. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. Before Logan could even react, Bolt's body, which had been limp and lifeless, went rigid. His back arched, his head snapped back, his neck muscles cording. A violent tremor ran through him, his legs kicking out stiffly. It was not a peaceful drift into sleep. It was a mild seizure. The violent, unexpected change shattered Logan's numb acceptance. This wasn't peace. This was agony. "He's in pain?" Logan screamed, his voice cracking with a sudden, raw panic. He looked up at the doctor, his eyes wide with terror and accusation. "You said it wouldn't hurt. He's in pain." Dr. Blake had frozen, her thumb hovering over the plunger. Her professional calm instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of sharp electric shock. She wasn't looking at Logan. She was staring at Bolt, her eyes wide, her mind racing. She dropped the syringe. It clattered to the floor, the pink liquid spilling onto the carpet. "Stop!" she yelled, the word a gunshot in the small room. She wasn't yelling at Logan. She was yelling at the universe, at the procedure, at herself. "Stop everything!" The small green room, built for quiet endings, was suddenly a scene of sharp, chaotic panic. The pink euthanasia solution, the liquid of a peaceful death, was a dark, spreading stain on the pale carpet, its purpose instantly forgotten. Bolt's body was rigid in Logan's arms. The high, thin, agonizing whine continued, a sound that seemed to pull every nerve in Logan's body tight. "What's happening?" Logan yelled, his voice raw with terror. He looked at Dr. Blake, his eyes wide and accusing. "He's in pain. You said it wouldn't hurt." But Dr. Blake wasn't looking at him. Her face, which moments before had been a mask of grim sympathy, was now electric with a stunning, intense focus. She was staring at Bolt, whose mild seizure was already passing, his body going limp again, but with a new involuntary twitch in his paws. "No," Dr. Blake muttered, her voice a low, disbelieving whisper. She was staring at the dog, but her mind was clearly somewhere else, connecting invisible dots with lightning speed. She snatched the blood report from the floor where she'd dropped it. "Leah, the light!" she commanded. Leah Turner, her face pale and streaked with tears, fumbled for the main light switch. The room was instantly flooded with harsh, white fluorescent light, chasing away the soft shadows. Dr. Blake was already at Bolt's head, pushing back his eyelid with her thumb and shining a penlight into his pupil. "He's responsive," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "But delayed." "What is it?" Logan pleaded, his arms still clamped around his friend. "What's wrong?" "The test," Dr. Blake said, holding up the paper. "The numbers. They're real. His kidneys are not functioning. I've seen renal failure 100 times. It's a fade. It's sleepiness. It's lethargy." She then pointed a shaking finger at Bolt. This is not. This isn't how chronic failure ends. This is a neurological symptom." She was on her feet now, pacing one step, then back, her mind visibly racing. She looked at the blood report again, then at the dog, then at the blood report. A look of dawning, horrified understanding crossed her face. "Wait. Oh no, wait, of course. It's not one or the other," she said, her voice dropping. "It's both. The kidneys are failing because of the neurological event. The symptoms are linked." She looked up, and for the first time, Logan saw something other than compassion in her eyes. He saw the sharp, penetrating focus of an investigator. "The blood test is right," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He is in kidney failure, but my conclusion was wrong. This isn't old age. This isn't a natural process." She took a step toward him, her gaze pinning him to the spot. "This is poison." The word hung in the air, terrible and alien. "Poison?" Logan repeated, his mind unable to process it. "What? No, he's at the cabin. There's nothing. He's only with me." "Think," Dr. Blake commanded, her voice sharp, cutting through his grief. "The last 48 hours. Anything. Chemicals? Cleaners? Rat poison?" "No, nothing. I would never—" Dr. Blake's eyes narrowed. "He's a large dog. This was a fast, massive dose. It's something that attacks the kidneys and the brain simultaneously." Her eyes widened. "Oh, God, antifreeze!" The word struck Logan like a physical blow. His blood went cold. "Logan, listen to me," Dr. Blake said, grabbing his arm. "Does your truck leak?" The image, so mundane, so forgotten, flashed in Logan's mind with the blinding clarity of an explosion. The dark garage, the sound of his wrench slipping, the small, bright, neon green puddle on the concrete floor. Bolt padding over, curious. He remembered seeing the puddle. He remembered being frustrated with the hose. He had not connected them. Logan's face went white. The blood drained from it so fast he felt dizzy. He looked from Dr. Blake to the dog in his lap, his dog, his friend, who he had just tried to kill because of his own stupid, catastrophic carelessness. "Oh, God," he whispered, the words a hollow breath. "My truck, in the garage. It's been leaking? A little green puddle?" He looked up, his eyes a mask of pure, abject horror. "I was working on it 2 days ago. He was in there with me." His voice cracked. "Oh, God, yes." The confession, the confirmation, was all Dr. Blake needed. The time for questions was over. The time for grief was over. She transformed from a doctor into a field general. "It's ethylene glycol," she shouted, ripping the door open. "Leah, get a gurney. No, there's no time. Logan, carry him, now, to the ER." Leah Turner, shocked out of her tears, bolted from the room. "Calling for a crash cart," she yelled as she ran. "What?" Logan was still on his knees, frozen in his guilt. "But you said his kidneys." "I said they were failing. I didn't say they were gone." Dr. Blake grabbed his shoulder and hauled him to his feet. "The poison is crystallizing in his kidneys. That's what the test showed. The seizures are the poison hitting his brain. We have a window, Logan, a tiny closing window, and we are wasting it. Carry him. Follow me." The command, the raw authority, broke through his paralysis. Adrenaline surged through him. He scooped Bolt up, the dog's limp body a dead weight, and ran out of the comfort room. They burst into the main hallway, a blur of motion. Scarlett, at the front desk, gasped. They raced past the exam rooms, past the shocked face of the woman with the cat carrier, and through a set of swinging double doors into the bright, chaotic heart of the clinic, the emergency room. It was the anti-comfort room. The lights were blindingly bright. The counters were stainless steel. Machines with screens and wires lined the walls. Leah was already there, tearing open packages. "Table, now!" "Doctor," Blake ordered. Logan gently placed Bolt on the cold steel table. The dog's body was limp, his breathing terrifyingly shallow. "Leah, get the fompazole, the antidote. Doses 20 milligrams per kilogram. Go!" Dr. Blake was already grabbing clippers, shaving another patch of fur, her hands a blur. "We need a central line, and start IV fluids, wide open. We have to flush his system. Get me a full metabolic panel, stat." "What? What is that?" Logan stammered, standing uselessly by the wall, watching his friend disappear under a tangle of wires. "The fomepizole," Dr. Blake said, not looking up as she expertly inserted a new, larger catheter. "It stops the poison from metabolizing, it stops the reaction, but it doesn't undo the damage." She pointed to the bag of saline Leah was hanging. "The fluids are to try and force his kidneys to work, to flush the toxins out. But Logan—" She finally paused and looked at him. Her face was grim. "His kidneys are already shutting down. The fluids might not be enough." "So what does that mean?" "It means," she said, "we prep for dialysis." She turned back to the nurse. "Now, Leah, let's get him stabilized. He's crashing." A machine next to the table started to emit a slow, alarming beep. "His pressure is dropping," Leah said, her voice tight with focus. "Push another fluid bolus," Dr. Blake commanded. Logan watched, his hands clenched into useless fists. He had walked in here to end his friend's suffering, only to discover he was the one who had caused it. The pink stain on the carpet back in the quiet room was the image of his failure. And now, the only thing standing between Bolt and the death Logan had already agreed to was this woman, this team, and a race against a clock he himself had started 2 days ago in a cold, dark garage. The chaos of the emergency room had evaporated, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The swinging doors had closed, sealing Logan off from the frantic fight for Bolt's life. He had been a soldier trained for action, for violence, for doing something. But here, in this sterile, brightly lit hallway, he was just a man in the way. "You need to wait outside," Leah Turner had told him, not unkindly, but with the firm finality of a medic clearing a hot zone. "We will come and get you. I promise." He had stumbled, his legs feeling like water, back to the main waiting room. The woman with the cat carrier was long gone. The cheerful instrumental music had been turned off. The sun, which had been a low, watery yellow when he arrived, began its long, slow descent, painting the sky outside the large windows in shades of bruised purple and cold orange, before finally surrendering to a deep, starless black. Logan collapsed into one of the hard plastic chairs in the corner, the same chair he'd avoided that morning. He did not sit. He fell into it, his body folding in on itself. The adrenaline that had propelled him from the comfort room, that had carried Bolt to the ER, drained away, leaving a toxic, hollow residue. His grief, the clean, sad, noble grief of a friend saying goodbye, had transformed into a monstrous, jagged thing. Unbearable guilt. He had done this. It wasn't fate. It wasn't old age. It wasn't kidney failure. It was a leak. A $2 hose clamp he'd been too lazy to fix properly. A puddle of neon green poison on a dark concrete floor. It wasn't fate. His own carelessness with the old truck poisoned Bolt. He saw it, an endless, repeating loop in his mind. Bolt patting over. Bolt curious, lapping at the sweet liquid. Bolt looking at him with trusting eyes. He, Logan Pierce, the man who prided himself on vigilance, on discipline, on routine, had poisoned his best friend through sheer, stupid, sloppy negligence. And then the second wave of his failure washed over him, even more suffocating than the first. He hadn't just poisoned him. He had blamed him. He had looked at the symptoms of that poisoning and called it old age. He had judged his friend's suffering and deemed him ready to die. He had wrapped him in a blanket, driven him to this place, and put his head on his friend's, whispering, "You can go." He had tried to euthanize the victim of his own mistake. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it impossible to breathe. The clean, disinfectant smell of the clinic was overwhelming, chemical and sharp. The low, steady hum of the fluorescent lights overhead began to change, rising in pitch, stretching into a high, thin, familiar whine. The ringing. Logan's hands began to shake. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the room was already gone. He wasn't in Bozeman, Montana. He was in Fallujah, 2004. The air was not cold. It was 115 degrees, thick with sulfur and pulverized concrete. The sound was not a hum. It was the high-pitched shriek of his own tinnitus after the blast. He was in the back of the Humvee. He was 19, not 41. He was choking on dust. "Holloway! Mark!" He was screaming, but the sound was lost in the ringing. He suffered a severe PTSD episode. The feeling of helplessness was identical to the day he couldn't save Mark Holloway. Mark, the kid from Ohio, who was always smiling, always talking about his mom's car. Mark was on the floor of the Humvee, and Logan was trying to reach him, but his hands were slick. He couldn't get a grip. He was supposed to be on watch. He was supposed to be checking their six. They had come from the alley. He hadn't seen the alley. "I didn't see it," Logan whispered, rocking back and forth in the waiting room chair, his eyes clenched shut. "I didn't see the puddle. I didn't see the alley. I wasn't watching." He failed to watch his six for his best friend. He had failed Mark, and Mark had died in the dust. And now he had failed Bolt, and Bolt was dying on a steel table. He was a failure as a soldier. He was a failure as a man. He had let them both down. "Logan?" The voice cut through the memory like a knife. He gasped, his head snapping up. Dr. Amber Blake was standing in front of him. She was no longer wearing her clean blue scrubs. She was in a set of gray surgical scrubs, spattered with something. Her hair was messy, escaping her ponytail, and her face was etched with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She was holding a styrofoam coffee cup. "What time?" Logan mumbled, his voice thick. "It's just after 8, she said. "At night, Scarlett's gone home." The whole day. He had lost the entire day to that chair. He's alive," she said, cutting him off. "But that's all I can give you right now. We've started the dialysis. We're filtering his blood manually, trying to do the work his kidneys can't." She took a long sip of her coffee. "The antidote, the fompazole, is working. It stopped the poison from metabolizing further. But the damage, Logan, the damage is severe." She sank into the chair opposite him, the first time he had seen her sit. She looked less like a doctor and more like a fellow soldier after a long, losing battle. "He's a fighter," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "I'll give him that. He's got more fight in him than any dog I've seen in a long time. But his body is shutting down. We're fighting to bring him back, but he's weak." She looked up, her blue eyes tired but clear. "I'm not going to lie to you. It's 50-50, at best. The next few hours will tell us if his body has any strength left to rally. 50-50. A coin toss." Can I see him?" Logan asked, the words barely a whisper. Dr. Blake shook her head. "No, not yet. He's unconscious and he's covered in lines. He's on a ventilator to help him breathe. There's nothing you can do for him right now. And frankly, my team needs the space to work." She stood up, her joints stiff. "Go home, Logan. Get some sleep. Staring at this wall won't change anything." "No," he said, the word sharp. "I'm not leaving him. I left him once. I'm not leaving him again." Dr. Blake looked at him, a flicker of understanding in her exhausted gaze. She nodded once. "All right, I'll be back in a few hours. Or sooner if anything changes." She left him. The waiting room lights clicked off on their automatic timer, leaving him in the near darkness, illuminated only by the faint, cold glow of the exit sign and the lights from the empty parking lot. The long valley night had begun. He was alone in the dark with the ghost of Mark Holloway, the memory of a green puddle, and the impossible, agonizing weight of a 50-50 chance. The world was a gray, formless void, a cold, hard plane of existence where sleep offered no rest, only a dull, aching oblivion. Logan had slipped into it hours ago, his body finally surrendering to an exhaustion so profound it was almost a small death. He hadn't dreamed of Mark Holloway. He hadn't dreamed of green puddles. He had simply ceased. He was in the plastic chair, his head slumped forward onto his chest, his neck screaming in protest. The waiting room was dark, cold, and smelled of stale air and old coffee. "Logan?" The voice was a whisper, a soft intrusion into his gray nothingness. He ignored it. It was part of the exhaustion, a gentle pressure on his shoulder. "Logan!" He jerked awake with a gasp, a guttural sound of panic. His heart hammered, his training kicking in. He was disoriented, his eyes wild. He saw a figure in the darkness and his hands balled into fists. "Whoa, easy. It's me. It's Dr. Blake." His vision cleared. The waiting room, the dark. Dr. Amber Blake was crouching in front of his chair. "What?" he mumbled, his voice a dry, thick croak. He scrubbed his hands over his face, the stubble on his beard rough and abrasive. What time is it?" "It's almost dawn," she said. His blood ran cold. Dawn, the time for bad news. He had been through this before. The pre-dawn wake-up, the quiet, somber face. It was the "I'm sorry to tell you" visit. His stomach hollowed out. He couldn't ask. He just stared at her, bracing for the words that would end his world. But the words didn't come. He looked, really looked, at her face. In the dim glow of the single exit sign, he could see her. She was still in the gray, spattered scrubs, a testament to the night-long battle. Her hair was a complete wreck, falling out of its ponytail. There were dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes, and her face was pale with fatigue. But she was smiling. It wasn't the sad, sympathetic practice smile of a doctor delivering a eulogy. It was a real small, exhausted, but genuine smile. Logan's brain couldn't process the conflicting data, the exhaustion, the smile. He started, his voice cracking. Is he... He couldn't say the word. Gone? Dr. Blake's small smile widened just a fraction. She didn't answer his question. Instead, she stood up, her joints popping audibly in the silence. "You should come in," she said. He just stared at her. "What?" "You should come in," she repeated, turning toward the hallway. He pushed himself out of the chair, his entire body screaming in protest. His legs were stiff, his back a column of fire. He felt 100 years old. He stumbled after her, his heart hammering against his ribs with a new, terrifying emotion. It wasn't dread. It was hope, and it hurt more than the guilt. He followed her through the dark, silent hallway. The clinic was coming to life. He could hear the faint hum of a computer, the soft click of a door opening somewhere far away. She pushed open the swinging doors to the ER, but didn't stop. She led him past the steel table where he had last seen Bolt crashing and into an adjacent room. The ICU. It was dimmer here, quieter. A single bank of machines was lit up, emitting a steady, rhythmic beep. Not the high-pitched, frantic alarm of last night. A slow, steady, reassuring pulse. And there, on a padded table covered in warm blankets, was Bolt. Logan stopped in the doorway. He saw the machines first. His friend was still hooked to an IV, a clear bag of fluids dripping slowly into the catheter in his leg. There was a monitor attached to his chest. But the ventilator was gone. The thick tube that had been forcing air into his lungs was gone. Bolt was lying on his side, his gray-white fur looking clean. His head was resting on a folded blanket. And he was not unconscious. His eyes were open. Logan's breath hitched. They were not the dull, cloudy, vacant eyes of yesterday. They were not the pain-filled, unfocused eyes of the seizure. They were clear and aware. They were looking right at him. "Go on," Dr. Blake whispered from behind him. "He's been waiting for you." Logan moved, his feet feeling disconnected from his body. He felt like he was walking on water, afraid he would fall through. He approached the table slowly, not daring to believe it. "Bolt," he whispered, the name a fragile, broken thing. At the sound of his voice, the dog's head didn't lift. He was too weak. But his ears twitched, and then, under the blanket, his tail gave a single, weak thump. Thump. The sound was so small, so quiet, it was almost imperceptible. But to Logan, it was a gunshot of life. A sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, tore itself from his chest. He lunged forward, his hand out. He was afraid to touch him, terrified this was a dream, a hallucination brought on by grief and exhaustion. He touched the dog's head. The fur was warm, alive. Bolt let out a low, soft sigh. Logan knelt, his knees hitting the hard linoleum floor. He pressed his forehead against the dog's side, against the warm, solid, living body. He couldn't speak. He just wept, his shoulders shaking, the long, terrible night of guilt and fear finally breaking and washing away. He felt a movement. He looked up. Bolt was visibly trembling with the effort, his neck muscles straining. He was stretching his neck toward him. He couldn't lift his head, but he pushed it forward just an inch, his nose bumping against Logan's arm. And then a small, wet, pink tongue emerged, and Bolt licked his hand. It was a slow, weak gesture, but it was everything. It was forgiveness. It was recognition. It was, "I'm still here." "I'm here, buddy," Logan cried, his tears dripping onto the dog's fur. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He stayed like that for a long time, just kneeling, his hand on Bolt's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Finally, he looked back at Dr. Blake. She was leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed, watching them with that same tired, beautiful smile. His eyes asked the question his voice couldn't. "How?" She walked over, her voice low. "He's not out of the woods, Logan, not by a long shot. His kidneys have taken a terrible, terrible hit. He'll likely need special food, maybe medication for the rest of his life. But he's alive." She stroked Bolt's flank. "He's stubborn. We filtered his blood all night. The antidote stopped any more damage, and his body? His body did the rest. He started fighting back around 3 this morning. We were able to take him off the ventilator." She shook her head, a look of awe on her face. "I keep thinking about it, that moment in the comfort room." She looked Logan dead in the eyes. "It was so close, Logan. I want you to understand how close it was. The symptoms are identical. The lethargy, the weakness, it all screams renal failure. The blood work is identical. The numbers, those numbers were end of life. There was no reason at all, to think it was anything else." She glanced at the pink stain on her own scrubs, a reminder of the spilled syringe. "I was ready. My hand was on the plunger. If it wasn't for that seizure, if he hadn't had that one single atypical neurological reaction, we would have—" She didn't finish the sentence. Logan looked down at Bolt, who was now dozing, his breathing deep and even, his hand still resting on his warm side. It was Bolt himself. With his last ounce of strength, he had not only tried to comfort his master, he had thrown up the one single flare that didn't fit the diagnosis. He had saved his own life. "He's a fighter," Logan whispered, repeating her words from the night before. "He's a fighter," she agreed. "Now, let him rest. He's earned it. You both have." A few days later, the sun was a startling, brilliant white, a stark contrast to the oppressive gray skies of the past week. It poured through the front windows of the Gallatin Valley Veterinary Clinic, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The light was warm, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, so was Logan. He stood at the front desk, signing the last of the credit card receipts. The number at the bottom of the bill was staggering, enough to wipe out his meager savings, but he signed his name without looking at it. The cost was irrelevant. "You're all set, Mr. Pierce," Scarlett Barnes said from behind the desk. Her smile, which had been so full of pained sympathy 3 days ago, was now bright and genuine. "We're all so happy for you, for both of you." "Thank you," Logan said, his voice still rough, but lighter. "For everything." He heard the doors from the treatment area swing open. Dr. Amber Blake and Leah Turner walked out. Dr. Blake looked like she had finally slept, but the exhaustion was still settled deep in her bones. Leah was carrying a small paper bag and a very large bag of dog food. "Well," Dr. Blake said, a small, tired smile on her face, "I'm officially discharging my most difficult patient." She handed the large bag to Logan. "This is the special prescription kidney diet. He eats this and only this from now on. His kidneys are damaged, Logan. They're functioning, which is a miracle, but they're compromised. This food is designed to be easy on them." Leah handed him the small paper bag. "And these are his medications. One is for his blood pressure, the other is a fluid pill. The instructions are written on the bottles, twice a day with his food." "I understand," Logan said, taking the bags. When do we come back?" "I want to recheck his blood work in 1 week," Dr. Blake said, her tone shifting back to the sharp, focused doctor. "I need to see if his levels are stable, but he's clear to go. He's been asking for you." As if on cue, Leah turned and opened the door to the hallway. "Okay, sweet boy," she said. "You can go see your dad." A moment later, Bolt walked out. He was not the limp, lifeless bundle Logan had carried in. He was not the trembling, seizing creature from the comfort room. He was on his own 4 feet. He was still weak. His movements were slow, his back hips stiff and wobbly. He had a shaved patch on his foreleg where the main IV had been. He was thinner. The ordeal had stripped him of what little extra weight he had. But his head was up, his ears were forward, and his eyes, clear and bright, were locked on Logan. Logan's throat closed. He didn't say a word. He just dropped to one knee. Bolt walked those last few feet, his gait unsteady but determined. He didn't pause. He walked right into Logan's open arms, pushing his head hard against his master's chest. Logan wrapped his arms around him, burying his face in the dog's clean fur. He felt the steady, warm beat of his heart. He felt the solid, living weight. "Hey, buddy," Logan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Hey, old man, let's go home." He stood, helping the dog stay balanced. He looked at the two women, at Dr. Blake and Leah Turner, his eyes saying what his words couldn't. "Thank you," he said, for not listening to me." Dr. Blake's smile was sad, but profound. "Thank him," she said, nodding at Bolt. "He's the one who spoke up. Now get him home." Logan helped Bolt into the passenger seat of the truck. This time, there was no wool blanket to wrap him in. Bolt sat, panting slightly from the effort, but very much alive. The drive home was the reverse of the nightmare from 3 days ago. The sky was a brilliant, sharp blue. The sun glinted off the snow-covered peaks of the Gallatin Range. Logan drove with both hands on the wheel, the cab filled with a quiet, peaceful silence. He glanced over every few seconds. Bolt was watching the world go by, his nose pressed against the glass, his tail giving a slow, happy thump on the seat. When they pulled up the long driveway to the cabin, Bolt let out a low, excited whine. Logan helped him out of the truck. The dog's paws touched the familiar dirt of his own land. He took a long, deep sniff of the cold, pine-scented air. He walked stiffly to the porch, found a patch of bright sunshine, and collapsed onto the old wood with a contented groan. He was home. Logan watched him for a long, silent moment. A wave of gratitude so intense it made him dizzy, washed over him. But his work wasn't done. He had one more thing to do. He left Bolt dozing in the sun and walked to the garage. He pulled the heavy door open, the sound of the metal wheels groaning on the track. The same cold, dusty air hit him, the same smell of oil and old gasoline. He looked at the floor and his stomach clenched. There it was, the dark chemical stain on the concrete, the scene of the crime, the proof of his failure. His jaw tightened. He didn't just look at it. He went back to the cabin, retrieved a bucket, a jug of heavy-duty soap, and the stiffest scrub brush he owned. He filled the bucket with scalding hot water from the kitchen. He went back into the garage, and on his hands and knees, he began to scrub. It was an act of penance, an atonement. He scrubbed until his knuckles were raw, until the smell of the soap burned his nose, until the water was black with grease and grime. He scrubbed until the stain was gone, until the only thing left was clean, damp concrete. Then he stood up. He walked to the shelf where he kept his automotive supplies. He found the source. The 1-gallon plastic jug of antifreeze, still half full. He looked at it as if it were a bomb, a snake, a thing of pure evil. He picked it up, his hand tight on the handle. He carried it out into the daylight. He didn't just throw it in the trash. He found an old, empty paint can with a sealed lid, poured the poison into it, and hammered the lid shut. He safely disposed of the old antifreeze, burying the can deep in the corner of his property where nothing would ever dig. He took the empty plastic jug and cut it into pieces with his utility knife. He was not just cleaning, he was eradicating the ghost of his guilt. That night, the cabin was peaceful. A fire popped and hissed in the wood stove, casting a warm, flickering orange glow across the room. Logan sat by the fire, reading. Or at least, he was holding a book. His eyes were not on the page. They were on the floor at his feet. Bolt slept peacefully at his feet, a quiet, deep, rhythmic breathing filling the silence. He was not on his mat by the door. He was pressed against Logan's boots, a solid, warm, living presence. Logan looked at the dog, and his mind drifted back. He thought about the pink stain on the carpet in the comfort room. He thought about the crushing, absolute weight of his guilt, a guilt that had felt identical to the one he carried for Mark Holloway. He had lived for 20 years in the darkness of that first failure. But this new darkness, this one had been worse. The darkness of failing Mark had been about what he didn't do. The darkness of poisoning Bolt was about what he did. It was an active, terrible confirmation of his deepest fear, that he was broken, that he was a danger, that he failed everything he was meant to protect. He had walked into that clinic to end his friend's life, but in reality, he was ending his own. Logan realized he didn't just save Bolt. In truth, he hadn't saved Bolt at all. Dr. Blake had saved his life. Her skill, her refusal to give up, had pulled him back from the brink of death. But Bolt had saved him. In that final, terrible moment, Bolt had fought back. He had given them the clue, the seizure, the hug, that had changed everything. He had, once again, woken Logan from a nightmare. He had pulled him back from a darkness of guilt and self-hatred so profound that Logan knew he would have never returned from it. If Dr. Blake had pressed that plunger, Logan Pierce would have died in that room too. Once again, Bolt and Dr. Blake had saved him from his own darkness. He was not just a man with a living dog. He was a man who had been given a second chance, a reprieve, an absolution he had never thought possible. Logan closed his book. He reached down and laid his hand on Bolt's warm, sleeping flank. He felt the steady, strong rise and fall of his chest. "Good watch, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick. "I've got it from here. I've got you." And he sat there in the quiet, warm cabin, a man no longer on watch, but simply at home. Logan and Bolt's story teaches us that the deepest bonds are often silent. They are not spoken in words, but shown in a quiet promise to stay on watch, a refusal to let go even when all hope seems lost. It is a reminder that the most profound acts of loyalty, those that can truly save us, often come when we expect them least. If this story of a soldier's faith and a dog's fight for life touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a story of hope. We invite you to join our community by subscribing, and we would be honored if you shared your own stories of unbreakable bonds in the comments below. Your support through a simple like or share allows us to continue bringing these tales to you. Our next journey is already waiting for you on the screen.